And thank you for joining us for an MP webinar covering wage and hour, conducting internal audits, and maintaining compliance. I'm Katie Kreider, Marketing Specialist here at MP. For those of you joining us on a webinar for the first time, MP is a full-service human capital management company. We offer a complete suite of products and services to support organizations through the entire employee lifecycle, including recruiting, HR, payroll, benefits administration, time and attendance, and compliance assistance. We support our clients with cutting-edge technical solutions, as well as proactive, reliable service and deep HR and payroll expertise. At MP, we are wired for HR and help our clients succeed by aligning their people strategy with their business goals. I'm excited to introduce your presenter for today's program, Donnie Pangburn. Donnie has a fundamental certification through SHRM. He has over 15 years of experience in human resource management with an emphasis on employee and leadership development, talent acquisition, benefits administration, and employee relations. Donnie has passionately mentored many interns seeking a career in human resources and is an advocate of continuing education. Donnie earned his Bachelor's of Education with an emphasis on orchestral wind ensemble music. He has spent numerous years in a human resource management role within contact centers, law firms, and the healthcare industry prior to joining MP. Donnie's goal is to obtain his SPHR certification by 2022 year end. Just a few housekeeping issues before we get started here today. If you'd like to submit a question during the program, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar later today along with the slides. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic off to Donnie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donnie, and I am coming to you live from the beautiful state of Kentucky. I hope everyone is having an absolutely fabulous Thursday. What a great day to talk about wage and hour, right? So before we get started, just want to let you know that this training is intended for educational and informational purposes. And while we hope you learn a lot today, we're not attorneys. I am not an attorney, and the information should not be construed as any type of legal advice. So with that being said, let us get started. All right, so again, welcome to the wage and hour update. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the trends for 2022, and will hopefully help you to prepare for any potential obstacles that may come your way. So we will be covering a DOL update, misclassification of challenges relevant to wage and hour, solutions for the Great Resignation and retention bonus and reward, the Great Remote Work Migrations, class and collective litigation, and then finally look to the states for some real action. So let's start with the Department of Labor update. So let's just jump right in here. The feds are going to turn up the heat, obviously. The Department of Labor has announced in early February that it will be hiring at least 100 new wage and hour investigations. And while we also understand it's staffing up and agency lawyers for enforcement purposes, and there's no doubt that the agency will be looking for that return on the investment. The domino effect of these measures means that we're going to see more investigations in 2022, increased litigation damages and civil money penalties, more challenges filed by employers to DOL findings, and increased litigation. So how can we avoid this mess? Begin auditing your pay practices now to ensure compliance before any outside investigation or lawsuits takes place. So we're going to talk about wage issue challenges. The first defense. So wage issues are some of the most frequent, expensive, and challenging employer compliance problems, as we all know. And compliant wage practices and classifications are going to be your first and your best defense. So we want to ask ourselves, when was the last time I performed an internal audit? And is my checklist up to date? To best withstand a Department of Labor wage and hour division investigation or audit, business owners and HR professionals must understand wage concepts such as the minimum wage and overtime, and should be aware of all relevant state and federal wage and hour rules. And one great way to stay on top of wage and hour updates and changes is to constantly review the DOL newsroom releases. And you can access those updates. That's going to be at dol.gov/newsroom/releases. So when we talk about internal audits, obviously they can be beneficial. It's going to be beneficial to conduct that audit of an organization's wage and hour practices. Conducting an internal wage and hour investigation or audit can be critical to your compliance efforts. And you may want to ask yourself, how confident are you that you have properly classified your employees as exempt under the FLSA, your Fair Labor Standards Act, or that your employees' exempt status has not been affected by any type of COVID-19 workplace changes, which a lot have. So over the past year, that pandemic has transformed how we do business, converting brick and mortar workplaces into home offices and online meeting platforms, converting your employees into remote workers, and altering employee pay, hours, and job duties. And with these changes, employees that you previously classified as exempt may no longer meet a particular exemption under federal wage and hour laws. So what exactly do you do? Well, the most effective way to catch and correct misclassification errors is to conduct that internal audit to examine whether your organization has properly classified each of its exempt employees. Regularly conducting those audits allows your organization to find and avoid risks before they arise. And additionally, if you have a practice of periodically auditing, this may mitigate the risk of raising those red flags to your employees and the DOL. In addition to this training presentation, just wanted to let you know, we would like to offer you a sample audit checklist that was created by one of our wonderful colleagues here. Her name is Sherry. And we can directly email that to you and just let us know if you would like to have that. Feel free to just send me that email request and I'll be happy to send you that checklist. All right, let's talk about some of those quick tips. So here are 6 quick tips to help you along your way. So make sure all non-exempt employees receive at least the relevant minimum wage for all hours worked. Familiarize yourself with the overtime exemption criteria and remember that simply because an employee is paid on a salary basis does not automatically disqualify the employee from entitlement to overtime compensation. We want to secure and maintain signed timesheets for all non-exempt employees verifying their hours worked. And you want to retain such timesheets for at least 3 years or longer under relevant state laws. We want to avoid prorating or reducing an exempt employee's salary based on the quality or quantity of work performed, unless such a deduction is specifically permitted by law. And familiarize yourself with the meal break and lactation break laws that pertain to the states in which you employ personnel. Ensure that employees are properly classified as either W-2 employees or 1099 independent contractors in accordance with IRS and the EEOC guidelines. Let's talk a little bit about those misclassification challenges. So the negative effects of workers or worker misclassification and possible reclassification can totally wreak havoc through an organization's human resources, finance, employee benefits, functions, and departments. And there are many issues that a company must deal with if they are found to have a misclassified worker. For example, here's a partial list of issues that must be resolved if an independent contractor is deemed to be an employee. Back pay, which is your minimum wage and your overtime pay. There's the failure to withhold underpayment of federal and state or local income employment taxes. failure to provide proper wage statements, such as those your W-2 forms, failure to provide employee benefit coverage and appropriate remedial action, failure to make employer and employee contributions to retirement and other employee benefit plans, and failure to provide required benefit plan disclosure and administrative notices. There's also excise tax under the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA, for failure to provide required health plan coverage. There's a civil tort liability to misclassified worker, as well as third parties who are injured as a result of a misclassified worker's negligent acts. And then finally, violations of state, federal, and/or foreign labor laws, which may include civil penalties and or notice requirements that are imposed by the government agency. And in addition to those legal implications, there's a number of other issues with significant associated costs, obviously, that often accompany a worker misclassification action. Fees paid to outside employment law counsel to help defend the case, management time and distraction to build and defend audit files, the class actions, and the negative press and damage to the employer brand. A collection of federal agencies and state regulators have indicated that they will place independent contractor arrangements in their crosshairs in 2022, and while also aiming to capture as many businesses as possible in joint employment situations. This effort to impose liability for misclassification and a variety of wage and hour violations to cause you to rethink business affiliations and contractor structures with this new reality in mind. Kind of scary, huh? So let's face the facts, as there's no denying it. Nothing in the post-pandemic era of work will be the same ever. So many of the employees who have left their offices to work from home in early 2020 have fundamentally changed. And so much so that the companies that now want to return back to normal, they're finding out that the employees don't. And in fact, many of them don't want to return at all. So you know what? That's the sad truth. So, you know what, in saying that, let's consider a trend. So up to 40% of the global workforce, they're considering leaving their employer this year. Now combine that fact with 69% of employees globally, which is a 15-year high, are struggling to find workers with the right set of skills. And this unfortunately provides a massive headache for companies and their HR departments. Let's talk a little bit about the solutions for the Great Resignation. So according to Accenture's recent findings, oftentimes what determines people's satisfaction has less to do with where they work and more to do with having all the resources they need to be productive. In fact, that 40% of us can be productive in both on-site and remote settings, provided we receive the necessary support. So the solution to the biggest current challenge for HR professionals is not as simple as bringing in more flexibility. The challenges are much more expansive. If you're among the many business leaders who are asking the questions of how to make remote work more possible for your employees post-pandemic, you may be asking the wrong questions, or rather an incomplete question. And so who is more likely to feel productive and healthy working on site? Well, these findings are saying Gen Z and younger millennials, people living in large urban areas, and people who work part-time as contractors or on project-based opportunities, people who worked on-site during the pandemic, and then people in smaller localized organizations. And so in saying that, who's more likely to feel productive and healthy working remotely? Well, the statistics show that females, Gen X and older millennials, people living in farm or rural areas, this could be due to the commute, obviously, and people who have been with their company longer, and people who work full-time. So using Accenture's list of necessary resources, there are two types of HR practices that are exemplified through different action points. The first type, retain and solidify your workforce which supports the idea that your HR department should solidify your workforce to ensure the people who already work for you stay working for you also in the future. And the second type, differentiate and advance beyond the minimum, which requires more innovation and focuses more on helping your organization become attractive enough to pull in employees that you will need for your future growth. So as you see, if you haven't already, it's time to get creative. Let's talk about retention bonuses and rewards. So retention and bonuses and incentives can potentially cause a little bit of trouble. Besides hiring minors, for instance, the other solution that many employers arrived at to address workforce shortages was to throw money at workers through retention bonuses and incentives. And let's face it, we've all either done this ourselves to retain talent or witnessed it within organizations. While there's nothing inherently wrong with doing so, employers who did not carefully think through their bonus and incentive plan documents to minimize legal risks could be facing problems in 2022. And you can also expect a wave of new litigation from employees who believe they were unfairly denied or shorted on such bonus payments. Some employees are incredibly talented with additional skills and know-how. They have become valuable resources that have a high hand in the growth and the development of the company. These employees are also offered a retention bonus to ensure that they do not use their expert skills and know-how anywhere else. And the value of the retention bonus, it's going to depend upon the service of the employee and the firm. It's paid as either a lump sum amount or as a percentage of the current salary at the end of a specific period so that the employee stays till that particular time. So we take the following steps if you want to choose the right person for those retention bonuses. Think about select talented employees. Look at the past performances. Find out which employees have contributed most in the growth and development of the company whose efforts have made a difference in the whole scenario. Look at individuals from critical areas in those shortlist items, or shortlist them, excuse me. Identify the employees. Identify the employees as early as possible because you do not want them to shift their allegiance in any condition. And then finally, recognize that the retention bonus amount might not be enough. So if an employee wants to negotiate that amount, be receptive and listen to them. Recognize that the amount might not be enough and participate in healthy negotiations to retain their services. The great remote work migrations. I'm going to move to the next slide. So many employees will remain remote or hybrid for the foreseeable future, and more employees are using apps to communicate with employees outside of the office. This means that you can expect a wave of wage and hour litigation from workers claiming they are not getting paid for all hours worked, including time spent checking employer-required apps, and have not properly been reimbursed for business expenses, such as your Wi-Fi, the data plans, cell phones. There are two steps that you can possibly take, and that is, let's make the effort to track employees' work through technology and consistent communication, and proactively develop policies and compliance systems. This can be tricky as we do not want our employees to feel like Big Brother is watching or monitoring every keystroke an employee makes. Class and collective actions are going to be the costliest and the riskiest types of workplace litigation a business will ever face. Class actions and collective actions are procedures that allow many employees to join together to bring legal claims against their employers. Class action procedures are commonly used when employers have engaged in illegal activities that affect a large number of employees. Class action lawsuits are also especially useful where an individual employee's claim would be too expensive to litigate alone. A good example is a requirement by an employer that employees work off the clock during scheduled break times. By combining many claims into a collective action suit, an individual may be able to vindicate a right to wages that would be too expensive to be brought as a single action. Next, we have overtime pay, which is another area where you can expect to see a greater amount of litigation this year in class and collective claims involving overtime pay. Scenarios are going to lead you to such an increase that has, in many cases, already played out. And many employers handed out hazard pay, bonuses, and other incentives during the pandemic to retain and recruit new workers and to reward staff. Excuse me. But in classic no good deed goes unpunished fashion, these efforts may come back to bite you in the end. So if you fail to account for overtime calculations in your payments, you could hear from plaintiffs' attorneys or government investigators looking to build on your generosity. Review your payment structures now with the help of wage and hour lawyers to make sure you're in the clear before you get bad news later in the year. Also want to look to the states for real action. So you can expect workers, attorneys to bring more wage and hour class action suits or lawsuits in the state courts this year, especially in jurisdictions with longer statutes of limitations and less developed laws. We're also familiar with situations where procedural problems related to personal jurisdiction in multi-state collective actions frustrate plaintiffs' attorneys, further leading them to state courts. And for this reason, you should prioritize an audit for wage and hour compliance, taking those state laws into account ASAP. And it looks like, so we want to look to those state laws coverage, or look to the states for some real action. Today, almost every state has its own wage and hour law, which may not prescribe a different hourly wage that was prescribed by the FLSA and which may or may not follow the exemptions afforded by the FLSA. State laws typically are more generous to employees in terms of the minimum wage, the scope of exemptions, and the definitions of operative terms such as overtime. And many states are going to require overtime pay in situations more favorable to employees than under the FLSA. In seeking to comply with the law, employers should always consult both federal and state laws concerning wage and hours. When states regulate wages and hours, they usually do so in areas and ways such as higher minimum wages, broader definition of overtime, more favorable, obviously, to the employee, and specific requirements for the method and time of payment, and then also different remedies for those violations. States are particularly active in regulating minimum wages because the cost of living varies greatly from one state to the other. States are less active, though, in regulating overtime because the burden of working long hours in one state is much the same as working long hours in another state. Another area that states commonly regulate is the timing of the payment of wages and payment of wages upon termination of employment. State laws often require payment of wages within a certain time frame, and payment of earned wages are often due immediately upon involuntary termination of employment. So before ending this session or closing this out, I do have a couple questions that have come through that I'd love to go over with you all. The first question was, what do you think is the best way to ensure my company stays compliant? Well, I can tell you what I've done in the past is, first, I always use a checklist. I conduct those spot audits every week. I conduct my internal audits, or those spot checks, if you will, every Friday morning. Numero uno is still going to be sure to keep all of those checklists. I keep mine in a binder. And then the next question is, what is an effective way to retain the talent that I already have? So if you don't already have a total rewards package set up, I may suggest putting together a brochure and providing those to potential candidates and allowing those candidates to see an overall picture of what your company has to offer. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and don't forget to request your wage and hour checklist. Again, it's a wonderful, talented colleague of mine, Sherry, who put a lot of effort into this amazing and extensive and highly useful checklist. So with that being said, I know it's a short session. I want to thank you all for attending this webinar, and I hope that you did find it beneficial. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions, or if you would like that checklist sent to you.
Thank you, Donnie. So much valuable information on wage and hour. Any questions that may have come in and that were not able to be answered will receive a response via email. The MP HR team is here to guide your organization on any HR compliance issues. If you would like to learn more about how we can assist your organization, please visit our website to set up a short 15-minute call. Be sure to join us next week on the same day and time for our webinar on avoiding an OSHA audit, best practices and legal advice for employers. Visit our website to register and to see the full calendar of upcoming events and available resources. We will be sending out the recording of today's webinar along with the presentation slides this afternoon. We will also include a copy of the audit as mentioned per Donnie. Thanks for joining us and have a terrific day.